Yeah, hello everybody. International trade and policy. Hopefully, we have overcome now all the technical problems from last week, um, and that we can start with this nowadays very interesting topic, which we have, if you remember what has happened the last 3 weeks and what this guy in the Oval Office, he's almost every day saying anything, and we don't know what he will say the next days. So, especially with the relation of this topic, he actually announced that he will raise um, trade barriers. Then he said, well, I introduced them against Mexico and Canada, and the next day he said, well, it was always was only a joke or something like this. And anyway, Mr. Zelensky is right now in Saudi Arabia. Actually, we don't know what will happen, and this, of course, international policy has a great impact on our country. Right now, we have the negotiations for the new government in Germany, and these negotiations are mainly driven by the events of the last 2, 3 weeks, and that we right now have to think about our security in Europe, that we cannot rely still on the United States. And even what we have read now is that many weapons in Europe, we are buying these weapons from the United States. And what has happened in the Ukraine? They just said, well, we press enter in the United States and then your weapons are not functioning anymore. And about this, we of course have also to think when we think about our national security. So, yeah, actually, we will deal mainly with the international trade aspects. And for this, I also want you to write as an exam a little term paper. This should not be that long, about 15 pages. And next week, we will choose the topics, and then you have roughly 1 month to write your term paper, submit it in the end of April, and in May, then we will meet for a presentation of your term papers. What will be these term papers about? Some of you maybe have already know me, that I want you that you deal with data, that you crunch your data, and some of you maybe have written my macro exam. There you had to deal with some time series. I also think some of you have already attended the global economics course. There you have written about some country and some similar you should do here, that you choose one country and that you then hopefully deeply analyze the trade situation of this country in two dimensions, that you should have a look at the main trading partners and the main goods this country is exporting and importing, um, and that you then should interpret your descriptive results you get out of it that you should interpret this in the context of some theoretical trade model, and this is the so-called gravity model of international trade. And this will be here, I think, in 2 weeks or something like this. We will talk about this gravity model that you can then take your data and hopefully can interpret your data within this model. And at some point, then you can say, well, the predictions of this model are also true for my country, or in some other parts, maybe you find, well, the predictions of this model, I cannot find it in my data. And well, then of course you didn't have done then a mistake, but then you have another situation, and then you maybe find reasons why the outcome of your data is not what this model is predicting. This is, of course, always also a scientific result. And about this, you should also think when later on, in 1 or 2 years, you start to write your bachelor thesis, also to falsify your hypothesis is also a scientific result in the end. Yeah, this would be the first part. And the second one is now you are, I think, about your fourth, fifth, sixth semester right now in your studies. And therefore, I want that you have a look in some theoretical models, in some theoretical papers. And these are then here some topics. If we are only around 8-10 people, then everybody of you uh, should choose just one of these topics. If we are around 15 or 20 people in this course, then you should then choose together with another person one of these topics, and you can hopefully you just talk about this until the next week. Well, all these topics are, yeah, quite theoretical. There is, of course, some mathematics behind it and so on. And in yeah, describing these models, analyzing these models, you don't need to go that deep in the mathematics behind it. Well, some are quite easy. Other models here, there you will find yeah, more advanced mathematics. What this is about, that I want to see that you understand these models, that you can read a scientific paper, and that you know what it is about. Because this, of course, is what you should learn here in your studies. So then, mainly the task here is taking these papers, 1 or 2, you find here, and that you carefully read it and then repeat what is in this, what is written down in this paper. And maybe you can then go also a step further and you find some practical example or something else. But in the end, all these are standard models in international trade. So you will find many, many sources if you start looking, especially in the internet, about these models. Um, okay, so here is only one topic where I didn't put any source. The reason for this is that the so-called Marshall Lerner condition is quite old and was written down in the 1920s, and therefore you do not find something like a classical 20 pages scientific paper, and it is a very general outcome. This topic is about the yeah, how do I explain? What happens if you introduce, for example, trade barriers like Donald Trump has announced? This, of course, means that you are changing the world prices in the world markets. And if prices change, then of course you would expect that also the quantities change. So in general, our assumption is the higher the price, the lower is my demand. And what you then see is that you have a discrepancy when it happens. So introducing the trade barrier means that you very fast change the prices, and then you see that the quantities adjust quite a bit later. So not instantaneously and not within 1 week or 1 month, that it takes some time. And this means so a very fast increase of prices. And at first, for some months, not very much happens with the quantity. And if you think of a supply or demand curve increasing or falling, then you would expect from this theory that quite fast also the quantities would adjust. And that at first almost nothing happens, and then there happens something to the quantities. This is therefore called then also this J-curve effect and why J-curve effect, because it looks like a J. At first nothing happens, and then a decrease or an increase of your quantity due to the price changes. But if you have a look there in the internet, then you will find also many explanations and sources for this Marshall Lerner conditions. But there is not that paper where it was firstly introduced. So it was an effect which was generally found, and then it was called after Lerner and Marshall because they have dealt with these topics, but they haven't written an explicit paper about it. And maybe Alfred Marshall, you know, because he is the guy when you are deriving from utility maximization your demand functions. These are the so-called Marshallian demand functions. Okay, so yeah, then think of a country you want to choose where you are interested in. The guys who have already written a paper in global economics, please do not choose the same country as you have done the last time. Okay, so just have a look at these topics, and then next week we will assign the topics that you can start. And then for today we will start with the lecture. Yeah, in general, I give, of course, my own lecture, and this is then we are dealing with social sciences. So there is no true model, there is no true view like you have it in natural sciences, and therefore I would also recommend that you have a look what other guys are saying about this topic, and therefore these are more or less standard textbooks for international economics, international trade lectures in the world. Uh, the maybe most common one is Krugman Obstfeld, International Economics. Yeah, this is a most standard textbook which is used. If you look at many other lectures, then you also will just find the slides from this textbook. Well, in my course, you will find, of course, also similar slides, but in general, I'm doing my own lectures. Um, then also Appleyard and Field International Economics. This is a little bit younger book than Krugman Obstfeld, but right now also a very standard textbook on international economics. And Feenstra and Taylor, this is a little bit more advanced. So if you are a little bit more interested in the mathematics behind it, then this is what I would recommend. Well, and if you are deeply interested in these topics, then you have to read the so-called the Gandolfo. So this is Gandolfo. He is right now almost 100 years old, very famous Italian economist, and I think the first time it was written in the end of 1960s or 1970s, and then it was always you got always a new edition of this very standard textbook. This is about, I think, 800, 900 pages. And in this textbook, you'll maybe find everything what is has been written about international economics. And of course, you find within this in this textbook also a big part of appendices, and there you find all the higher mathematics, what it is about. Because in general, you can say that the so-called classical international trade theory, this is maybe, you know that in my former life I was a physicist, this is a really beautiful general equilibrium model. Because what is international trade all about? Well, you are modeling it that you have two trading partners, they are in competition, and then they just interchange their goods and services. And in the end, this is just a general equilibrium model which you find here. And well, if you are more interested in finance, then I would also recommend this other book here. But this one here, this is the most um, important textbook about international trade. Okay, then, as I already mentioned it, everything is about the data. In my macro course, I have also the slide where you find the institutions, the links for the data, and here are some recommendations also where you can then find data, trade data, international data for your country. Of course, in every country in general, if you, I wouldn't recommend that you choose a country from deep Africa or somewhere else because there it would be quite hard to find data. But in every developed country, of course, you have a statistical office, and there you find also data plus statistical offices from the country. Here you can compare this with the data sources which I gave you for For Germany, of course, also and the central bank of your country. There you will also find international data of your country. And in general, the World Trade Organization and UN Comtrade. This is the data bank from the World Bank, especially for trade data. But at here you can have a look at it, but it is very hard to use it. So this you will find also always at every data bank you have different formats, and how to get really out the data is quite often not that easy. So although at this source you find everything, it is hard to find it. So therefore, on the other hand, I would recommend this data source because there you can really very intuitively click on the data and you find it quite fast. And I think it goes back until 2001. And this is the time where you should start. Yeah, if you choose a European country, then of course also the European Central Bank. They have this European Central Bank data portal. You find there, of course, for European countries, the European Statistical Office, Eurostat, for international trade data. Aggregated data you find at the International Monetary Fund, but then mainly you have aggregated exports and imports together. And of course, always the World Bank in general is a good choice to find data. Yeah, and if you have problems or something like this, then just ask me and maybe I can help you. But if you go a little bit into detail, then maybe for your country, you are a better expert than me afterwards. Okay, so then we have some time left, and I will then start with the content. And maybe since the first time Donald Trump has entered the administration in the United States, I sometimes think maybe he should have heard some general lecture on international trade. Because what he is right now doing, that he is claiming, well, let's rise all international prices since the United States are the largest economy in the world. And if they have a higher toll, then of course the prices in the world will rise. And what he then claims is that then inflation in the United States will go down. Well, you can say this, he can say everything, but if this happens, there you have to make a really large question mark. And also to raise trade barriers that you then claim afterwards, my country is better off. This you can also question. And yeah, and for this, why I have a view which do not coincide with the view of the US administration. there is maybe a quite good argument, and maybe you have also heard about this in school or in some other lectures here. This is the so-called Ricardo model. And this is named after David Ricardo, and this is about the so-called comparative advantage. I don't know, have you already heard, maybe in school, about comparative advantage? So in general, it is just an argument why working together is for everybody better. So that you have then a so-called win-win situation. That if we stick together and we start work together, that there are not always winners and losers, but that you have a classical win-win situation. Well, actually, this is more or less the same as the argument when we say, why are we organizing our society that we interchanging goods and markets? Well, if you have full competitive markets, then what the market equilibrium means is that for everybody it is a win-win situation. For the suppliers and the demanders. You are free to change at the market equilibrium. And from your demand curve, you would say, well, I would pay for an apple 2 euros because I'm hungry. And if you have to pay then at the market 1 euro 20, then you are happy. Because due to your preferences, you would have paid up to 2 euros. And since changing at a free market, you have only to pay 1 euro 20, well, then you say, I saved 80 cents. Well, you do not have then 80 cents more in your pocket. Of course, you have 1 euro 20 less because you are buying this apple, but you are happy. Because from your demand preferences, you would have paid more than you have to pay at the market. And on the other side, take the producer. He had some costs and everything, and he went to the market and said, well, to get out of my costs, I need at least 1 euro for this apple. If I get more than 1 euro for this apple, then I will sell it. Well, and if the equilibrium price is 1 euro 20, then of course he is also happy, or she. I have, so to speak, earned 20 cents. And it is a free market. Everybody can freely choose, shall I sell and buy for this price? Well, and this is what an economy and free economy is about. Not about winners and losers. It is about to solve the general problem of an economy, how to divide our scarce resources, which goods should be produced due to our own preferences. Well, and so to speak, then these Ricardo model, the model of comparative advantages, then is in the end an argument that you say if you have two countries, they have specific resources, they have specific abilities to produce, that if they specialize due to their specific situations, and this is then called this comparative cost advantage, that then in the end everybody is better off. That both trading partners benefit, and the maybe surprising outcome of this model is that this is still true if one country, so to speak, can produce every product better than the other country. And this is quite surprising. So think of a developed country in the midst of Europe. Think about Germany. Why should we trade with some developing country in Africa which has no special resource, no diamonds, no aluminium or something like this? Only sand in the south of the Saharan desert. Well, in this case, we would say, well, in Germany, we can do everything better than the people there. Why should we trade with them? Or later on, we will do this with an example. This is called also then the Robinson Crusoe economy. So you can think of Robinson Crusoe sitting on his island. He is alone and he has somehow to survive. So he is learning to fish. He is learning to get otherwise anything but what he can eat. But he comes from the United Kingdom. He was a rich man. So he had in his former life many servants. So he would not be the best fisher in the world. And then Freitag is coming. Well, and he is living there in the South Sea. And in order to survive, we can think of that Freitag can do everything better than Robinson Crusoe. Why should they work together? Why isn't Freitag saying, well, I can everything better than you, what we need in order to survive together at this island? Why should we work together? And this is the reason then, yeah? Okay, this is also an argument, but this would then take a very long time, or this takes a long time. But actually, this model is about the fact that it is directly good for them to start to work together. That they specialize due to their comparative advantage and later on then interchange at free markets these goods. And this is still, yeah, maybe the main argument to work in the world together. To also, you find this if you click on the web page of the World Trade Organization, then this model, you find then this model as an argument to go down with your trade barriers. This is the argument for free trade. Yeah, oops. And here some facts about this guy, David Ricardo. Well, he was quite a generalist, mathematician, natural scientist, politician, of course, also economist, philosopher, and he was also a trader at the stock market in the 19th century, and there he was also very successful. So in his times, he was maybe one of the richest men in the world. Yeah, And before we start with the model, we will in a minute then see that at a first shot, this model seems very, very easy. So we will deal just with linear functions, production functions. This means, so to speak, we look only at one production input. This will be labor, so hours of labor. And then we say producing a chair, we need 10 hours. This then means if we have an input of 20 hours, we get out of it 2 chairs. But, and therefore I have this quote here, be really careful because this we already saw at the former slide here. What I meant with one person can everything better than the other one. This is the so-called absolute cost advantage. Take my example with the chair. This would mean one person needs 10 hours to build a chair, the other person needs only 8 hours to build a chair. And we are very, very fast to get back and always only arguing with this absolute cost advantage. Of course, this is easier. But comparative means that we have to look at two sides, and we come to this in a minute, on the cost. How do we interpret costs of a good? And there is a very famous anecdote of Paul Samuelson. Maybe you know him also from other lectures. Maybe you know that the Nobel Prize was not introduced by Alfred Nobel in the beginnings of the 20th century, but then from the Swedish National Bank in 1969, and he was the second in 1970 of the Nobel laureates. And of course, he is maybe the guy in his PhD thesis. This is a very, very famous source. There he more or less started all the mathematics you have to deal right now with it. And yeah, he was once challenged by a mathematician, Stanislav Ulam, of course, also as everybody of these guys is coming also from Europe. I think he came from Hungary. And there you also maybe see that the ideas of Donald Trump are maybe not the best for his country. Because in Europe, especially in Germany, when we started something like this, then many, many, many of our cleverest people left our country. And yeah, if you look at this so-called Manhattan Project and afterwards then the developing of other weapons, many, many of these people were coming from Europe after we have expelled them, especially out of Germany. Well, and he was challenged and asked, name me a proposition of all of the social sciences which is both true and non-trivial. Well, true, there you have to be, of course, a little bit careful. So, which is really important, which we really find that we are acting like this model. And it was several years later, then he thought of the correct response and he said, well, it is the model of comparative advantage. That this is logically true, this you will see then when we are talking about only linear production functions. It seems very easy, need not to be argued before a mathematician, and that it is not trivial is attested by the thousands of important and intelligent men or people who have never been able to grasp the doctrine for themselves or to believe it after it was explained to them. So everybody then claims, well, I have understood it, and if they should explain it, what it is about, they are failing. So be careful. It seems easy, but it is not that easy. Okay, then we will start with this model, and therefore we start with some definitions. And the first one is, in general, when we think of it, if we compare two producers who can do things better than the other, then we arguing with the so-called absolute cost advantage. And an absolute cost advantage exists when a person A can produce a good more cost effectively than a person B. And here, and this will be then the difference to the comparative advantage with the same input resource. So in general, we look at a production function y is some function of an input, and maybe this is labor, and this is our production function, measured maybe in time. So for example, if one person can produce a good faster than another person A and person B, then person A has a absolute cost advantage over person B. So, and then the next slide, I hope that you have already heard about this. We have also another definition, a general definition of cost in an economic way. And this is the concept of opportunity costs. Have you talked about opportunity costs in other courses? Maybe you can explain it in your words what opportunity costs are. Maybe you can give also an example. Mhm. Yep. Yes, and then And why do you then individually have a trade-off? I want one aspect. You are almost done with the definition in your words. But one aspect. Why is it a trade-off for you if you purchase one good, if you buy one good, and therefore maybe it costs 50 euros, and then you cannot use these 50 euros to buy another good? And what is the trade-off? Why is it a trade-off that you uh, cannot buy the other good? What concept do you then apply? Why is it a trade-off for you? And in general, you have different alternatives. One good, another good, and having one good, maybe let's say 50 euros, a new T-shirt, quite expensive anyway, a special T-shirt, 50 euros, and you want to buy it due to your preferences, because when you have it, you get utility for your own out of it, having this T-shirt. And then 50 euros, maybe go into a good restaurant, having a nice meal. Then you cannot go to this restaurant having this nice meal. But if you would have this nice meal, then you also would have got utility out of it. So you're losing the utility because you cannot consume the other alternative. And so to speak, then you are measuring having the one good, spending the money for your T-shirt, then you are losing, measured in utility units, that you cannot consume the other good. So therefore, opportunity costs are, so to speak, a relative measure. I'm measuring, so to speak, the costs of one good in utility units of the other good. And this is opportunity. Costs are the maximum alternative earnings. So in general, you are not only choosing between good A and good B, so between the T-shirt and the meal, you also can buy some other things with 50 euros. So you have maybe 15 alternatives. And what we then think of, you order them in the row. What is my best alternative, second best, third, and so on. And then I choose the next best alternative, which I'm not choosing. And this is my, in the end, missing utility, choosing the alternative which I'm doing. And this is opportunity cost. And I think in business administration, you had it investing in your own flat or something like this. Then you are not paying a rent. Well, you are really not paying something. So to speak, you have no costs. But economically, I think then you have argued, well, I have opportunity costs that I do not obtain the rent of the flat because I'm living in the flat. I do not get the rent if I would not live in this flat. Or investing in a new production line, let's say €1,000,000. What is then the economic opportunity cost? You also have the alternative to invest this million at the financial markets, earning some interest, maybe around 4%. And then you say, well, I have opportunity costs of this missing interest, which I also could have got investing alternatively €1 million at the financial markets and not investing it in my new production line. Or maybe in 1, 2, 3 years, you start your own company. Then you are your own boss. Then there will not be every month something at your banking account. Hopefully you are then happy having started your hopefully then successful own company. But then of course you also have opportunity costs because you are a clever guy. And then you also have the alternative that you work for another company, earning every month that what you find then on your banking account. Let's say 5,000, 6,000 euros per month. So starting your own company, being your own boss, then you also have these opportunity costs. Not earning every month a loan from a wage from some other company. So this is in the end, one of the most general concepts in economics that we also think that we are at every time choosing between alternatives and that we always choose between these alternatives thinking in opportunity cost. So in general, here the definition opportunity costs are the maximum alternative earnings that might, so my second best alternative, have been obtained if a productive good, service, or capacity had been applied to some alternative use. So, and since we have written down here maximum, this means then these are the earnings from the so-called second best alternative. And here, this is what I'm always doing, talking about football. A little example where we can maybe also talk about opportunity costs. So just last week, we had this Champions League match between Bayer Leverkusen and Bayern Munich. And last week, you had also a decisive exam. And then you think of 3 alternatives you can choose. You watch the Champions League match, have a drink, and you do not study for your exam. The second one is that you have a waiter's job in a cultural restaurant. Well, and in this cultural restaurant, they don't have the zone, and therefore you cannot see the football match. But you are working there at that evening, and therefore you can roughly earn 150 euros. And the last one is you lock your TV in the cellar, throw away this key, and you are learning for your exam. So maybe just name, and you are fully free in choosing what is your best, what is your second best, what is your third alternative. What would you say? What would have been your decision? So there is no right or wrong. Just give me a feedback. Yeah. The exam is the next day. Yeah. You would study. So let's say you are guy A, and for your it would be then The third would be the best. What would your second best alternative? Okay, 3, 1, 2. And the other ones. There's no right or wrong. 3. Okay. And you? Okay. 3, 2, 1. Okay. Okay. Then, anyway, there you hope you are learning that you get out a good mark for your exam, and this is maybe the argument why you choose alternative 3 as the best one. But now we can now look, what are the opportunity costs of learning for the exam? And if we take you, or let's, I think then it's more easy. Let's take B and C at first. What are your opportunity costs learning for the exam? Yes, so here we more or less have a direct measure that I would earn 150 euros. So then I could say, well, in general, I do not obtain 150 euros. So in this case, if this is your range of these 3 alternatives, then we can say we do not earn 150 euros, and that this is then our opportunity cost. And then let's take you. What are your opportunity costs? Yeah. Yes. And what else from your ranking? Because you have also number 2 as the third place. And not only not also, because looking the match is more worthy for you than 150 euros. So for you, measured so to speak in now utility units, you know that it is more than 150 euros. Here, watching the game is more worthy than 150 euros. So you are missing a utility larger than 150 euros. And this is also a quite good example because nowadays we quite often always try to measure everything in money, in US dollar, in euros. But actually, generally, this economic concept of your opportunity costs, it doesn't need money. It is more general. It is in general about our own preferences, our own utility unit. And this you really have to keep in mind when we now go further back to our model, because now we are defining a comparative cost advantage. And this, and here then you see that the building blocks of our model are quite simple. We are just looking at two goods, A and B. We have two producers. This in the end are our two trading partners, 1 and 2. And we have only one production factor. And we have a linear production technology. And if it's linear and we have only one input factor, then of course we have also a production function which exhibits constant returns to scale. Do you know what constant returns to scale is? Have you already heard about this? This is also one of the general assumptions which we make in general in macroeconomics or in economics on production functions. This actually then means if we double input, we double the output. So, and now we can say then that opportunity costs in our model, since we are producing or we can produce only two goods, is that we then measure, so to speak, the costs of one good in units of the other good. Because if I put my time in producing good A, then within this time I cannot produce the other good B. And comparative cost advantage means oops, uh, oops, comparative cost advantage in producing good A means to have I need also the first person's comparative cost advantage for person 1 in producing good A means to have lower opportunity costs than person B. And so opportunity costs in this model are measured via units of the other goods. And this we use for the definition of a comparative cost advantage. And this is the main point of the model. If we go back in a minute, that you can write down it. If we go back to the absolute cost advantage, we measure the costs for every good always with the same unit time. The production or the cost, sorry, the costs of all goods are measured in the same unit. And if we go to the comparative cost advantage, then we are measuring the costs in units of the other good. So this means the costs of the goods are measured in different units. And this is this relative concept. So what is the cost, the comparative cost, the opportunity cost of producing 1 unit of good A? This is how much less units can I then produce of good B if I increase the production of A by 1 unit. Something similar you have talked about in microeconomics when you have talked about the slope of the indifference curves. The slope of indifference curves is also called, do you remember it? Yeah, rate? Yes. And there you also ask yourself, how much units of the other good, x2, when I go to the left, do I obtain when I reduce x1 by 1 unit given constant utility? This is also a relative measure. And this is quite often what we are doing here in economics. And this is maybe this key point what Paul Samuelson here meant when he said, well, just looking at the functions, linear functions, very easy. Then everybody says, well, it's okay. But if these 1,000 people, clever people, should explain this model, then they are failing. Because you have then to think in this relative measure. Okay, then let's go also just through this last slide and then we will go to a first example next week. So this I already said. We have labor as one input factor, and the countries, the trading partners, they should also only differ due to different labor productivity or labor coefficients. So if we take, for example, the production of the chair, then we should only differ how much time do I need for producing one chair. And this then means that we obtain that we have a linear production function. This means our output equals some constant times our labor input. And this is then the productivity of labor. Of course, if this capital A is larger, the more chairs I can produce with 1 hour. And as a labor coefficient, there we just take the inverse of it. And this is then just the number, how much time do I need for one chair? And what we also then assume is we are producing two goods, and we assuming total flexibility of labor. So we always can choose, shall I work in this factory producing good A, or should I work in the other production factory producing good B? So I'm always able to produce both goods. This is, of course, also a very strong assumption, because why are you sitting here? You hope that you in the end are able to do things better than somebody else. And here is just the assumption, well, you can work in every sector. And we are running out of time. Then maybe you have also talked in other courses. This exhibits constant return to scale. Have you ever talked about the fact why we are assuming that in general, especially if we take the longer time perspective, that we assume that production function exhibit constant returns to scale? So the reason and about this we will then also talk next week is that this is then in line with fully competitive markets. So if we assume that we have fully competitive markets, then it is a good assumption that we think that production exhibits constant returns to scale. This is in line with fully competitive markets. Okay, then think about your country you want to choose and have a look at the topics for the term papers. And no, not next week, on Thursday we see, or next this week. Yeah. Next lecture is on Thursday. And thank you very much for today. Ob ich das? Weiß gar nicht.